welcome to Anne Baer. Anne Baer, how do I pronounce your name, man? Let's go for that one first.
Well, I was born in France, so it's a German name, but you can spell it Baer, and you can in Israel adopt the Bet Aleph Resh writing, which makes it Be'er, like a well.
A well, I think that's Matim, right? A Be'er.
Yeah, it fits actually part of my activity.
Exactly. I mean, when we get to iKare, and I saw your explanation that it's also iKare, you know, the farmer, so, and the main thing, the tachlis. So there's a lot of word plays that are going on over here, which is cool. Okay. So anyway, having Anne Baer on today, who's a sustainability expert. Okay, lots of years of experience in international innovation consultancy and a business leader. You've got a very impressive background. Okay, I can see you've been doing so many things over the years, and you've been managing chambers of commerce and a public speaker, and integrate into different business practices, and as well, you've been with the French ministry doing kind of a special envoy in Israel. Not lastly, but currently, I guess, you're doing iKare Innovation, which is your consultancy. You've been in this world for many years. You have consulted and taught and inspired for many years. And that's why I want to just throw you straight in there and say, you quoted, okay, in your LinkedIn profile, and you said, Enfin, there are 3 French major energy players that united to call every consumer to self-constraint. Now, how can we as end users and consumers meaningfully consume less energy?
Well, you're starting with the end, actually, because
I'm throwing you in the deep end.
Yeah, we are supposed to talk about tech, and when you talk about tech, you dissociate yourself from the solution. You say, okay, let's go to scientists, let's go to technologists, let's go to geeks and entrepreneurs, and they will find a solution for us. And the conclusion I would like to reach, and if I can have an impact today, is to say that this has nothing to do with the main responsibility that we have as individuals. And change will come from everyone individual that will adopt, not talking about constraining ourselves, but thinking and acting differently.
So I'm going to leave the rest of this answer for later, because I did throw you into the deep end. And my first real question that I wanted to actually ask you is, why were you knighted? You were knighted by the French government, I believe. Tell us the story.
Oh, you talked about the French ministry. It was the foreign ministry. And they decided that they want to enhance relations with Israel on the basis of the startup nation, like almost every country did immediately in the same years or immediately after. So I was appointed innovation officer at the embassy, and my mandate was to bring as many new projects of collaboration, technological collaboration between Israel and France. And Israel was already very well known for the participation to the EU programs. Israelis have achieved over the years results that not even France, which is a legacy scientific and industrial country, has ever achieved. So I used all the funding available in order to find potential partners to agree to co-develop IP together, intellectual property. And we had like 48 files presented for funding at the Innovation Authority, which was then the chief scientist on the Israeli side, and on the French side, the equivalent, which is BPI France. Some of the projects had an ecological impact, but sustainability was not the focus. The focus was on co-development between these 2 countries. Now, I continue acting on the economic and technological diplomacy level on a pro bono basis today through iKare Innovation or my own activities. And I promote a lot of, let's say, understanding and enlightening information about Israel in order to drive more French investors into Israel, but in the other direction, to also explain to the Israelis how France can be the great platform for their sustainable innovation solutions, since Europe and France is one of the leaders, economic leaders of Europe, and especially on sustainability was on the forefront. France is very well positioned in terms of supporting R&D, in terms of being a logistic hub with opening on different oceans and being in the middle of Europe. And I think that too often the Israelis tend to go to English-speaking countries first, or even to Germany on specific industries where they think they will find more partnerships or more low-hanging fruits in terms of potential market. The French market is very interesting, and one of my pro bono activities is to promote it.
Okay, so that's an amazing starting point, because, I mean, as we all know, Israel being a tiny local market, we naturally and intrinsically look elsewhere. And Europe is, obviously the big gorilla in the green sustainability space. And we know that Europe kind of is really enticing. Personally, this kind of feeling often jumps out that it's the Scandinavian countries that are the ones we should be speaking to, because they seem to be ahead of the innovation curve there. And France and the mainland countries, I don't know, I'm not aware personally of hearing so many cooperations between companies that have set up in France, that have maybe done better testing of their technologies in France, et cetera, et cetera. But are you saying that you're witness to many, many cooperations that have gone on and that are currently going on between France and Israel?
I'll give you an example, a concrete historical example. France is not an oil and gas country. France has developed the nuclear industry long ago, as you know, and is a world leader in producing electricity from nuclear energy. But France is also a champion in water management, in waste management, in all sorts of environmental services, energy transition, but mostly saving energy solutions. So let's take water. We had an issue in Israel, which is a scarce country in terms of hydric resources. And we addressed the issue through desalination. Who was our first partner? It was at that time Veolia, which is a French leader in desalination, but not only in desalination. And they won in the tender, which was quite brave at that time. They won in the tender that the conditions were just unbearable for all the competition. They were the only one who agreed at that time and managed to do so, to produce 1 million cubic meter of water, which is 1,000 liters of water, for a price which was as low as $0.50 at that time. The main price for desalination is not the filter, it's the energy, the power. So the equation is always an equation of power. So after winning this first tender, they co-developed with the ecosystem, which was already very, very rich in terms of water solutions. We are known in Israel for having developed water solutions, not only Netafim, but many other companies. So they co-developed efficiency measures and patents and solutions that made up with this target, not only for domestic use, but also for the next project. So it was a win-win situation. And during the coming 20 years, almost no public tender was ever won on the basis of the same price. So they were like 20 years in advance over the competition. Today, like almost 30 years later, we are able to use this competitive advantage as an asset in our economic diplomacy with Arab states, with our neighbors, And to name one of them, with Jordan, with whom we have a long-lasting peace agreement, but much less economic cooperation as we could. So the agreements that were signed a little less than a year ago were just based on technologies and know-how developed more than 20 years ago in collaboration between French and Israelis. And it's bringing a political advantage to the region.
Well, that's fascinating, because I'm actually very, very interested in the water story in Israel, and the development and the history of that. And Israel seems to be still, we've got a lot to be proud of. I just wasn't aware that we had such a deep and long-lasting cooperation with the French technology companies in order to achieve that. So that's very important that you've informed me about that, and it's good to know, and it gives me a lot of extra hope, even though I'm full of hope. But I'm going to then swing to another point that you rose, that you put up previously, and that is about nuclear energy. So we know that France is famous for its ability to have created tremendous nuclear energy infrastructures. And I think right now, with the Ukrainian war, which has broken out, and all the energy compromises that are going on, France is kind of the only country that's, I think, feeling in that area, that's feeling quite confident that we've got endless ability to make new energy. That being the case, there's this big debate going on right now, right? With renewables, are we going to put all the energies in into what type of renewables? And we do hear thrown out sometimes that nuclear is, at the end of the day, actually the cleanest. I mean, if we could deal with the radioactive wastage, and it's pretty safe, actually, if you look at the numbers of people who've died from various forms of consequences of energy production. So do you see ahead of us a major renaissance in nuclear energy, and perhaps in like small, mini nuclear, creating apparatus and stuff?
I'm not an expert in nuclear energy, and I must disclose also the fact that my father was a nuclear engineer, and we grew up in the most nuclear area of France, so next to a plant, which explains why also I'm also fighting for renewables today.
I was going to say you're glowing.
Yes, absolutely. There are some elements that I don't want to detail here in my medical file, but in terms of sustainability, I went into sustainability in the 90s, early 90s already, through the United Nations, and I had the opportunity to have a few discussions with experts all around the globe, and also with my father. And nuclear power is a fact. In Israel, less in terms of civil nuclear power, but in France, we were born into nuclear energy, especially after the Yom Kippur War, 73, when France, just like now, decided to diversify its supply and be less dependent upon the oil and gas countries. I remind you that we have no oil and gas, but we have ideas. This was the motto, the political motto with which they sensitized the population. On n'a pas de pétrole, mais on a des idées. No oil, but ideas. And they were also calling population to save on energy, to target the ideal temperature at home and in office at 19 degrees. Look at what temperature usually you use with your air conditioning today. So 19, and I grew on these values. So nuclear energy has its pro and its cons. Now we have the climate challenges, which are less and less contested today, but used to be very contested. So the way you look at things, at figures, at statistics, at facts, there is a limit to how much you can deny the facts. So today the facts are more evident to more people, and we look at the potential energetic mix with all the options on the table, and nuclear energy is one option that reduces the emissions of gases and actually contribute to achieve our commitments at the global and local level. looking at geopolitical threats, you also counterbalance the sustainability commitments when you are managing a country and you are a decision maker. You have to take into account other considerations, which is also what Israel did, by the way, when we discovered offshore our gas potential. We looked at the geopolitical asset we had there, not only at the power economical asset with all the consequences on the environment. I want to remind the people that gas is emissive. Gas is a fossil energy, maybe less than other fossil alternatives, but still it's not a clean and it's definitely not a renewable energy. It is something we take from the future generation. It is hazardous. We have to deal with methane and with even longer lasting gases in the atmosphere. So gas is not a clean solution, but still it's a little more economic and environmental than depending on oil producers. Regarding nuclear, today, the acceptability has completely changed. And there are already decisions, not only in France, but in other countries, Belgium and other countries. I can think of other countries that are now considering importing know-how from France and from other places and developing their nuclear power. And nuclear power in 2022 doesn't have the same potential impact, negative impact, as it had in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 70s, where we didn't know some of the information that we have today, and we didn't have the options, the technological options. I don't want to sound like promoting nuclear power, because I'm looking at the sustainable solutions, and we have enough sun, and we have enough wind, and we have enough thermal power in order to find other solutions and to develop storage technologies and transportation and networks in order to support hydrogen. Today, hydrogen, in the same time that we talk about nuclear, we talk about hydrogen in France, and we want to become the champion of hydrogen in Europe and maybe in the world, just the way we became long ago, at the time of my father, the champion of nuclear power.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important to emphasize the consequences of all of the energy production. I mean, nuclear, I'm keenly aware the actual production itself may be clean. The stations are massive amounts of cement and raw materials, and it's years of, to build a nuclear station, which if you look at Europe now, they need to keep warm next winter. They can't wait for years. So we have to blend these things together, absolutely. The gas, which we can kind of agree is a temporary stage, it's doing a very important job right now. But I think we need to just consider all of these different technology creation technologies. And somehow that is our challenge. And that's what I kind of want to bring to the attention of the listeners. How do we mitigate? How do we play one against the other? Has any country got the luxury? For example, France is actually in an easy situation relatively. They could say, well, we know nuclear, we know it absolutely brilliantly, and it's done a great job, and we can predict it, and we can now do it very safely. And this is infinite energy. But even France, you can see, are now backing on the next dinosaur, or the next, not the dinosaur, the next, unicorn, let's call it, to say that hydrogen is the next game in town, or potentially at least, and don't fall behind in that game. So this is one of the big challenges. How do we play the game and do the right mix in these different countries? Israel, obviously, like a country like Israel, I think what you ascribed to France earlier, where you said we've got no oil and gas, but we've got thoughts. Israel is a classic example of a similar idea, which meant we got no natural resources, at least we had none, and we have to use our brains, we have to use innovation, and we have to make something from nothing. So the example of water you gave, we turned around and said, well, you know what, actually, all we've got is wastewater, but let's make that into usable water, for example, and we recycle about 90% or something of our wastewater. So these are challenges which we're throwing out there, which we need to embrace, and we need to embrace them fast, though, because the world needs energy. I was speaking to someone in Australia last week, and they were saying how they are also now starting with blackouts and with times out for electricity because they haven't got enough. This is Australia, and this is everywhere. So we have a lot of work to do, okay? And we need infinite energy at this stage. So we'll go into the next questions, but the challenges are out there. So now
if I can react to what you just
sure.
said, when we talk about nuclear or hydrogen, we talk mid and long term. And as you said, we need first to spend the winter. And regarding the coming months, the winter for Europe, but also the summer here in Israel, which is so hot. For this, we need energy now. So the first consideration in planning our usage today that we can have is to reduce our consumptions, to make efforts to reduce. And the article you just mentioned that I posted on LinkedIn is exactly that. It's those who are supposed to produce power, to plan the supply at the right price and to deliver that to the consumers already know what winter we're going to spend. And they are calling for each of us to reduce our consumption. So what's happening today in Eastern Europe is not only a political threat over democratic states in Europe, it is a threat over the challenges that we have in climate. And it is a threat that comes with an opportunity. And the opportunity is to realize that the energy transition requires exactly that, to reduce first our consumptions, industrial and domestic, any consumption that we can reduce at the private and public level. It also requires to think differently, to have new alliances, to look at regional cooperation, swapping electricity for desalinated water, like between Jordan that is going to produce solar energy and Israel, but also bringing gas from the Middle East through the region of Israel into Europe, which is something that can be done long-term, mid-term, but also short-term, because there were already discussions involving the east, south, and north part of the Mediterranean basin. And now Turkey is also part of it. So instead of having one more Gazprom and one more pipeline from the north of Russia, we are now at the center of the solution.
We are. Okay, and this is great. It's great for our local needs at the moment, I guess, because we need to also make benefits. But it was interesting the last year, the flip around with the Minister of Environment. She a year ago kind of turned around and said, no, we're not increasing our gas supplies. And
Minister,
suddenly now what happened?
It's Karine El-Ahrar at
yes.
So it's the Minister of Energy.
Exactly. Sorry. Yes. So Minister of Energy, and I'm not blaming her in any sort of way. Geopolitics is important. We've seen the world is being shaken all over the place. You're giving me a particular challenge, okay? And that's why, because on the one hand, we're talking about kind of consumer behavior, okay? And consumer being could be governments as well and organizations. And I fully agree with you. I mean, I know I'm sure both in our private lives, we're on a mission to try and minimize as much wastage and use as little throwaways and all the little things that we can do.
Look how I live. I mean, in the jungle in order not to mobilize any other resources.
A true camper. But even though, and that is something very close to my heart in various ways, we can maybe go into that some other time. But my current agenda from a kind of a corporate pushing point of view is, using technology, okay? There's solutions that come from behavior, and there's also solutions that need to come from technology. And, when at the last, at the last climate conference in Scotland, in Glasgow, last year, it was when Naftali Bennett, the Prime Minister, turned around and said, okay, enough talking about Innovation Nation, what about Sustainability Nation? And that did actually just tuned into something inside of me. Yes, we need to do that, right? And we've got a good start. So my question to you, my next question, is that when you, both on the investment level and on the kind of business alliance level, look at Israeli entrepreneurs, okay? And you compare them to French entrepreneurs and to other global entrepreneurs, how do we stand up to them? How are we on a level of expertise or knowledge compared to our associates all over the world?
First, you're completely right. When coming to Glasgow, this Israeli delegation of 120 members led by, for the first time, Prime Minister, rose the expectations from Israel at a very high level. And I had the opportunity to talk with Europeans after Glasgow and to feel how this speech was heard and perceived. And actually, we are so sometimes full of despair that we think that Israel will be the light of the nations, or Lagoyim, and that we will bring the tikkun olam, the reparation of the world. And people in a somehow irrational way think, okay, we have no solution, but you are going to make miracles. So now the expectation from the startup nation to be the sustainable nation that will bring Or Lagoyim is very, very high. And when you look at the ecosystem in Israel, what you see is a trend. For the last 2 years, you see the younger generation of the entrepreneur coming out from the army and not going to cyber, going to energy and going to climate tech. This is true. We see maybe 50 companies that are already active and proposing some kind of climate related solution, which is not a lot for the world tenders that are already published and waiting for the competition to come from Israel too. And we see some rounds, but still investment in clean tech is rather low as compared to what we could do. So we are in what we called, what I would call Gartner year one of the curve. We are at the beginning of the 10 years path. And I believe that in a few years, the ecosystem will be much more mature. I see that solutions should come to solve the most burning issues like carbon capture. There are not enough solutions around the globe, and I hope that the deep tech and the out-of-the-box thinking of the Israelis, who can be very naive about problems and find solutions just because they don't know enough about the problems and all the people who tried before, they keep coming with great, foolish sometimes, but working ideas. So carbon capture is one of the CCU, what we call, is one of the track on which I think solutions could come from the deep technology that we find in Israel. Hydrogen, but it's more long-term. We already have less than, let's say, a handful of solutions, but not many more in Israel. It's going to grow. These are the tracks I see and the trends I see.
Okay, listen, yeah, that's fascinating. I'm going to have to start, I could speak to you for hours. There's so much we need to speak about, we could speak about, but I'm going to have to stop speaking for hours and get towards one or two other questions, which I do need to stick in before I can part from you. I noticed that you're about to launch Women in Tech, right? I believe it's even like next week or something. It's very soon. And I want to just understand a little bit about your story. What is this Woman in Tech? What is it trying to do? And why do you see a fundamental justification for having a separate movement for women in green tech, so to speak, as opposed to just people in tech?
Okay, so I'll explain that to you. I actually studied political science. I'm not a scientist, although in politics. And I want to encourage younger women today to see the potential of the innovation ecosystem, of sciences and of technologies in order to promote women. I believe in women's rights, women's lead. I got everything for granted when I was born after the revolutions made by our mothers. What I want is to be able to sustain this freedom to the coming generation. In Israel, do you know that in average, the salary that you earn in high tech is 130% more than the salary that you earn in low tech? So meaning that 10% of the people earn almost twice and a half as much as the others. In the same time, life is very expensive, and it's not gonna get better because the shekel is going to remain high. And if you, as a woman, work for even the average being 11,000 shekels in low tech, if you work for 11,000 shekels, you cannot be independent from the others and raise, in average, your 3 children per family, per mother. If you are raising your children together with someone that loses his job, or you lose this someone, you need to be independent. So I'm just looking economically about, when you talk about sustainability, you need to sustain yourself, you need to be independent. And women should know how fascinating it is for a little effort to choose in a very determined way to go to technology, which is also good for Israel and it's good for women. This is my rationale.
Okay, well, I look forward to seeing the launch. I don't think I'm invited to the launch, but I look forward to watching it and to hearing about it. And I do look forward to seeing how it progresses, absolutely. And wishing you all the best with that one. Now,
thank you very much.
Really, I do want to hear more about it. 1 or 2 final questions. Unfortunately, I do need to come to a close soon. But my first one is, if I were to give you a magic wand and asked you what you could do with this wand to give your grandchildren or children a better future, a better world, what would it be?
You're not going to like the answer. It has to do with population density. As the Jewish people who have brought this dream and made it come true during the generation of our parents and grandparents, it's very difficult to hear that the population density today in Israel is similar to that of India. Look at the sky and the color of the sky in India. Our population density in Israel today, with our 9 million people, is the 30th in the world out of 232 countries. And it's not going to get better because we have the highest population growth index of OECD. For developing countries, we have the habits of consumption and production of developed countries. So we have a very high ecological impact, much more than in Sahel or in any place in Africa. And still, we continue to make kids and to bring large families. Today, if I look at my single child and I think about his future, I will be able to help him. If I had 7 children, I would not be able to help him or her. So my last insight is think about the ideal size of family in a more sustainable way. This is my message. And here you can have impact every night when you go to bed.
Okay, well, that's actually interesting that you came up with that particular one. I actually have 6 kids, okay? So I'm on the other side of the fence over there. But whatever our decisions are, right, in terms of that, and I appreciate the point that's been made, we simply do need to create a world and a world view which can facilitate that. And we need to spread our resources with intelligence and with smartness, right? And if we've got lots of kids to look after, we're under so much more of an obligation to, in a sense, make a world that they can also live in, right? And, in Israel itself, totally, when summer comes along and we feel the oppression of the heat and we want to kind of realize that most 80% of the country are living in this small little belt and we haven't got that much space around us, we need to continue to green the desert. We need to make more living space, around us, which exists, but we just got to get there. We've got to make it livable. And so part of that, my challenge personally, I deal with intellectual property and with taking technology and trying to leverage the technology, and with a focus on green technology today. That is in a sense my passion, what I'm trying to do on the corporate side. But there's also this whole educational side of educating the future, the generations, what to do in the future. So we can also green the world, not just stop the damage, but do good, not just stop the destruction and the noise and the pollution, but to build a green and better air, better water that we can actually have a nice life with, we can enjoy it. And so part of that, when we talk about greening the desert, isn't just for the sake of, growing stuff. It's also just to make beautiful environments, which we have kind of done in many places. We need to keep on doing. So on that level, that's where we are.
Well, I let everyone decide upon him or herself and come to Tel Aviv in rush hours and try to drive to any place in this country to understand in which situation we are. We are today as big as Austria, as Switzerland, which are also 9 million people. We are not the 3 million that I knew when I started to work on what we call the carrying capacity of the planet for the United Nations in the 90s. That's how I came to sustainability. We are now stronger, we can think differently and be less in a survival mode and more in a sustainable mode.
That's amazing. I know, like me personally, you know, I've started working back at home, so I don't need to travel unnecessarily. I'm on my bicycle all the time, whenever. And when I think of Tel Aviv, I think of trains and buses and bicycles. I do not think of driving, because the idea of finding parking and driving around there drives me crazy. I hate the traffic. I hate it. I got this passion. You know, I'm usually a chilled out kind of guy, but when I hit the traffic, I lose all my chill. Okay. And so I definitely see eye to eye with that. In closing, Anne, I would just want to know from you, you know, if you were to write a book, I don't know if you've written a book yet, but if you were to write a book, what would it be about? What would the main theme be of that book right now?
I really haven't written it, and that's the reason I'm not able to answer.
Well, we're going to have to brainstorm this after the session, because it's a challenge that I want to give to you, to me as well. I'm not releasing myself from that challenge. And I do want to close out now because we need to. The time is up. I really do appreciate your time. It's been wonderful speaking to you. I think we've got so much more to speak about, but it's been a great starting point. On behalf of me and the listeners, we want to thank you for your insights, for your inputs, for your passion, for your energy, for your direction. I wish you all the best with the launch next week of the Women in Tech chapter in Israel, and we look forward to being in touch with you to move many, many great things forward. Okay.
Thank you, Yaron, and
you.
continue the good doing.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Wishing you all the best, and we look forward to being in touch soon. All the best. Thank you. Take care.